Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Jamie Punishall. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Lionbridge. I'd like to welcome you to my session today that we've entitled Lexperience, uh, the key to removing friction and thriving in the new digital first universe. Experience for me is really a play on words, of course. It's about the customer experience and really about how we use language to get at the core of driving that experience so you can optimize your multi-market sales. For those of you who don't know Lionbridge, very quickly, we are one of the world's leaders in helping multi-market brands drive their sales through local relevance, local resonance, local respect in any language across any device for any kind of experience in any market. Today, I want to walk you through a simple story that really talks about how important your internationalization strategy is to your over globalization efforts, and really try to address three things. One, to really talk about customer expectations. We know that there's a rising degree of customer expectations in the world. They want to be met their way in their channel, in their language of choice. And we really believe you cannot get to true global expansion and achieve the total addressable market in all the places that you're trying to penetrate without a world-class language and localization strategy. That was going to require some linguistic excellence. And you can see this already from about, I would say, 25 or 50 firms that truly view the world as global, the entire planet as their potential customer base, particularly through the digital lens. And so what they've done is reform their strategy, their process, and their technology around linguistic excellence to fuel all the rest of their go-to-market and customer support activities. And the last part of the story will really be about the benefits that you can get from doing this, how we are able to move faster. We're able, frankly, to cover more. We're able to do it with less money and cost, and at the same time improve customer satisfaction and ultimately sales, because that's what's driving all of these efforts is the expansion and growth into new markets. So with that, let's jump straight into the story. My theme for today really is that you can't meet these customer expectations without getting world-class language and localization, as I mentioned a second ago. And that we think that really foots very well with what you've been spending your time on over the last 5 days here at Pinpoint. You've really been focusing on three critical areas. How do we get to a frictionless path to purchase? And the question you got to ask yourself is how much friction actually exists in your path to purchase that's a result of language differentials, currency differentials, or other market specific buying patterns that exist. You don't address those, there's no frictionless path to purchase. The second theme you've been talking about is really driving key customer and exceptional customer experiences. Customer experience is emotional. Lots of great quantitative studies from Forrester and the like that show that in the end, it's how people feel about you that drives the satisfaction and the feelings of experience. What drives that emotion, how personalized and relevant it feels for folks, and what is literally the first dimension of personalization? It's language. Without that language excellence, you can't achieve the customer experience excellence. The third key dimension you've been exploring for the last week is around digital transformation. I don't have to tell anybody how important that is. It's been true for a while. I've been working on digital transformation efforts for 25 years, but certainly in the last 6 months, that has achieved really a paramount performance. And underneath that is an expensive infrastructure and a very difficult strategy to support global operations that without internationalization, you ultimately can't achieve true digital transformation. So I'm going to go through that story but ladder everything up to these three key themes. Language really is at the heart and at the core of helping to facilitate all of these transformations. Ultimately, I think we're all really being buffeted by six key trends that surround those three key themes that we just reviewed that I think are worth thinking about and then looking underneath to say, wow, what's common across them? And I think it's really that they're all fueled by semantics and categorizable attributes and language. So let's think about some trends that we're all dealing with. Right? The first, of course, is experience. Experience widely recognized as a key differentiator and the key objective here is how do we create an excellent but consistent experience as folks move across our channels and across our markets. We're spending a lot of money on global branding. How do we make that quite consistent? And how can you do that with language barriers, with cultural barriers, and market-specific barriers? As brands and boards realize the importance of brand, and companies spend more money on their brand and those brands go global, the question is, how do those brands translate across those markets? How do we not lose the investment inside of the branding as we change cultures and barriers? And how do we remove those barriers so that the brand can be more powerful? As it turns out, actually, customers, and we'll look at some more of the data in just a few slides, but they would prefer to buy from a global brand they know than even a local company that they're doing business with, and language is one of the key barriers there. Third, of course, is digital transformation. It is simply paramount that we get here, but operating that cost effectively and efficiently, and frankly, just achieving the speed and the scale and the agility necessary to operate in today's digital universe is staggering, and it can't be done if you haven't optimized it to deal with your multi-market, multilingual challenges. The fourth key trend, excuse me, that not as well talked about is that B2B customers, for those of you who serve the B2B marketplace, really in the last few years have closed the gap, and they are operating exactly like B2C consumers. Even as B2C B2C players or B2C experiences, and the expectations inside of those experiences have really ratcheted up. So if you're a B2B player, you just need to operate as if the experience that somebody gets at an Amazon or a Disney or a Netflix or anywhere else is in fact the expectation they have for your experience. And underneath that, again, is language, cultural relevance, local respect, and market buying preferences. I don't have to tell any of you that we are all struggling to maneuver our way through just an explosion of content, both as consumers and as producers. We have to produce more, it's got to be better, and it's got to be a lot faster. So you've got to achieve speed at scale to maximize both visibility and maintain relevance. And there's simply no way to do that without refactoring or reconditioning against the fact that you're going to have to create some content that will be translated, some content that will be transcreated, some content that has to be native, but all of which needs to hang together in a unified experience. And finally, right at the edge, but coming on really hard, is the emergence of these AI-powered experiences, voice search, speech to text, AI-generated content, and videos. Just so much AI-powered capabilities that as marketers and companies, we can embrace to better serve our customers. And underneath all of that, of course, is how do you organize the data? How do you give your content meaning and attributes so that the AI can process it and actually help you achieve that speed and scalability and better customer experience? So there's this common theme between all of these seven, and for a couple of them here, right, these three in the orange box, they have been really accelerated and exacerbated by the global pandemic. Because of course we've taken away big chunks of the physical universe, both B2C and B2B. In fact, in B2B's case, we've added probably more digital experience than we've ever seen before. And so the import of those three has grown even higher just in the last 6 months. Okay, so language is important. So how do we move forward? Well, we need to achieve linguistic excellence, right? This is really what we see as one of the key differentiators for the companies that are having the most success operating across markets. They're pivoting their world universe from just being a multinational that is a collection of local players, which is really an old modality rooted in the physical and the geographic world of the industrial economy. But in the knowledge economy, it's digitally first. And in a digitally first universe, the planet, a full multiverse universe, multimodal, multimedia, multi-channel, multilingual, multi-market is what should drive. And that's where we really need the linguistic excellence. So how do we get there? Let's start by actually showing where it breaks down for folks. And to do that, I actually want to start just assuming that your source content is in English. This story would be the same if it isn't in English, but for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to show you what happens across the digital journey for a company that starts with English source content in an English-speaking source market. And I want to start by taking you back through a little bit of history. I was a history major and I'm a little bit of a history buff. And the chart that you're looking at now is one of the most famous infographic of the world. I'm also kind of a design guy. And it's widely regarded as one of the best communicators of information in one graphic. But what you're looking at is a modified version here that shows Napoleon's march to Moscow and returned with his army. And when Napoleon left Moscow with left Paris with 400,000 men in his army, by the time he was done battling for Moscow, he's down to about 100,000. And by the time he got back to Paris, it was just 10,000. And so why am I sharing with you a story about Napoleon? Because it's a pretty good metaphor for what's happening if you start at the top with your total addressable market and you look at all the barriers that are in place that are linguistic, and cross-border and currency and locally relevant that get in the way and leave you with a very small portion of global sales at the end and not realizing your full global TAM. And why is that? Well, let's start with most of the world's content is in English, and yet most people don't speak English. And then we move into buyer preferences. And we can see that lots of folks either can't engage, struggle to engage, or won't engage when that content is in English, or i.e., not in their native language. Even if they try to engage with it, they struggle. We see fewer buying. We see more cart abandonment. You see folks who won't repeat buy. Because even though they were able to make it through the buying process, they couldn't then get customer support inside of their own language. And so, the end, you start with all of this content and all of this effort into driving these great experiences in your source market. You export it out to all of these other markets, but you haven't optimized it or optimized your system in order to operate that way. And so, we start with a lot of promise, and already because we're operating not in the language of our buyers, we lose a lot of potential sales. The story on the way home is just as problematic because even for folks who are doing plenty of localization or plenty of translation, they really aren't doing it with this mindset of internationalization. And just a quick note, internationalization is really just a strategy that says, I'm going to reset my people, process, technology, my point of view. I'm going to create everything knowing that it's going to be sold in multiple markets, in multiple languages, in multiple currencies, in multiple buying patterns. And so I want to set the foundation of my infrastructure from my global content process to the way I set up my PIM or the capabilities I need in something like my PIM, because otherwise I'm going to end up spending a lot of effort to get less value in trying to rework everything. That's really what internationalization is. And we see this if we take the journey back, right? Folks who aren't doing a great job, they aren't setting their content with the intention of internationalization right out the gate. What do they see? Lower SEO, much lower visibility, lower click-through rates, made worse by the fact that because you're reworking something that wasn't fit for purpose, it tends to take you longer, you spend more money, and it's more effort for the teams. So that's a lose, lose, lose. And the cherry on top of the whipped cream on top of this cake is that with all of that effort to maintain a global brand and all of the spend to get your brand out into all these markets, because of these non-optimized processes, roughly about 4% of all the effort, all of the content produced or the experiences produced by most brands end up on brand, which is a real travesty. In the end, that's just lost sales. It's a lot of expense and lost sales. This challenge is compounded by how successful the global leaders are operating and the changing in expectations. Right now, we've seen this about over the last 10 years. The number of languages that global leaders are offering has doubled. It's up to about 30. And that is more than many of you I know are offering. Maybe that's more markets than you offer, but that's why they're the global leaders. They're operating in lots of markets and they're doing it well in language in market. But even more importantly, we can feel the challenge in even optimizing our processes to support partners, particularly the global leaders, against much, much more aggressive turnaround times. And what that really means is they are trying to operate in their source market, their home market, and their destination markets in almost simultaneous fashion with just a slight delay, 2 to 3 days, to have a piece of content or have a dimension of experience fully localized and operating inside of each of their markets. That's really a dramatic speed increase over just a few years ago. And the reason is because there's real business value on the other end of it, right? If you just focused on localizing your product descriptions and currency, we can show you multiple business cases where you're going to achieve roughly about 40% increase in sales. So that is not a small number. All those of us who are in performance marketing and really fighting for just an extra 0.5% improvement or 1% improvement, we're talking about here something that's quantumly bigger than that. 40% improvement by doing this right. Now that requires rethinking data schemas and a whole approach, but there's big ROI on the other end of it. If you look at other parts of the journey, if we were really going for that frictionless end-to-end experience and really improving our visibility, supporting customers properly with manuals, with multi-market, multilingual customer support, real-time or near-time, really making sure that you eliminate all of those buying path impact journeys, there's another 20-30% ROI and market expansion to be had by doing all of this well. It's difficult, there's a lot there, but there's real business impact here. The leaders understand this already, and when they looked at themselves, they understood that the way in which they were approaching the universe meant that they were paying or trying to manage agencies in each market, sometimes multiple agencies per market. Because they weren't achieving a consistent experience, they're overspending in their paid media, either to drive those sales or to try to change the perception of the brand. They are overspending on technology because they are not integrating things properly or needing additional things to do some transformation. And their teams are doing extra rework and effort. And if they were to pivot their approach and rethink that strategy, that process, and that technology with that internationalized mindset, then they could pivot to success. The balance, of course, is how you drive that global brand consistency, that global experience consistency, at the same time allowing for the very real and necessary and impactful local relevance or local activities or localization that will make something more impact at the end. And the key to this is to understand that companies, as you know, you experience this, they tend to swing back and forth, centralize everything and then decentralize everything. The leaders have found that the right mix, sort of the third way, is a balance between the two that says global consistency is the prime objective, but we need to do that in a way that empowers local relevancy. So we've got to rethink how we do that to strike that, but that global consistency is very important because, again, as I mentioned, consumers would prefer actually to buy from a global brand. They've even said they would pay more, they would pay a premium to buy from a global brand that they know if they could do it inside of their own language. So that global consistency and global branding is really important, but it has to be executed in such a way that it feels locally relevant and locally tuned. And the key here is to get your local teams really focused on the things that are so essential at the edge. So it's localization by exception, not localization by default. And that's a little bit of a pivot, but it really frees them up to generate the content that's specific to that market that wouldn't get created in the home market, to tune the path and the experience just a little bit, because that is how the buying experience shifts inside of their own market. Really, it's about how do they do performance marketing and optimized experience inside of their own market by shifting just those most critical items. Okay, so we know the problem and we can see the opportunity. Let's talk a little bit about why this is difficult and then how we can get much better at it. So let's talk about the difficult part first, right? It's just the sheer number of combinations when it really comes down to it. When you start taking your product catalog and you really raise it to the power of language, with all those different language combinations, you can quite quickly get an explosion in your catalog that's almost untenable. If we walk through a single example, I think we can really see this, right? So let's just take something as simple as a sweatshirt, right? You start by coming up with one product. It's a lovely sweatshirt. Of course, you're not just going to offer it in blue, you're going to offer it in 4 colors. So now you've got one piece of content or one set of descriptions that have rapidly moved to 4 sets of descriptions. Of course, you're going to describe that product in many, many different ways across many different channels. In fact, different channels using different media and different modes, from forms to videos to mobile apps to paid advertising to you name it. And so you take that one piece of content and you start adding all these dimensions, and the amount of content starts to explode. And then, of course, you take it to the power of language. So add 6 languages or even 6 markets to that mix. And you now get an explosion of possibilities. And if you are at a market like India, for example, where you really need to localize into 22 languages, in Switzerland, it's 4 or 5 that you need to go into. And in each of these markets, now your content just explodes. And so that's the real challenge, right, that everybody faces, is that exponential increase as they try to go across market. So let's talk about sort of how we fix that. What is it that the global leaders, these 25 or 50 companies, know that you don't? And it goes back to something I said earlier. They know that to achieve true globalization, one of the key dimensions they have to have is adopt the strategy of internationalization. And they have to do it at a senior strategic level, just the way they are now with digital transformation or customer experience, where it gets paramount importance in the way the strategy is set and the go-to-market plan is constructed, the tech plan is constructed, et cetera. And so they're really optimizing their process, their technology for this multi-market production and multi-market support. Really the entire supply chain for the way they construct content and experience is optimized for this multi-market support. And there are really 5 key areas, 5 key problems that they have to address in order to get there. The first, of course, is siloed decision-making, siloed resources. This is the problem of centralization versus localization, or sort of local office tension that I mentioned a second ago. And with all of those silos, you've got an inefficient tech stack, and obviously you've got non-coordinated process and behaviors, and it just fails. And it fails because there's no global framework. There's nothing, no coat rack hanging it all together that says this is how we're going to produce the content and the experience and have it operate in each of these markets, but with as little rework and little adjustment as possible. Again, consistency by default, localization by important exception. It is important. It's not that it's not important, but we don't have to do everything. And in fact, the consistency matters given those buying patterns of preferring global brands and paying more. They suffer from a third problem, right? No global control really over translated brand material or product material. So home office designs something with a certain intent and objective in mind, and it starts to break down because they don't have any controls once things leave their purview and go out into the individual markets. The fourth area, of course, is quite similar. They have no visibility over even a lot of the perspective of their customers in each of those markets, because social listening tends to be quite narrow and market specific. User reviews, Twitter activity, whatever the channel and the mechanism is for that global dialogue inside of their global community, it's being viewed locally and not globally. So we can see the differences and the similarities as important across those markets. And the last part, of course, the last problem that they have to address is no cost controls. No cost controls over what's happening for translation or content creation across all of these different markets. And that just leads to great degree of inefficiency and a great degree of rework, excuse me, inside of the global content production process. So that's what they know. How do they solve it? Well, they solve it by focusing on a couple of things. The first is really designing an internationalized global content and global customer experience production process, setting that foundation right out the gate. Strategy, people, process, technology. But starting with that internationalized strategy, you know, when you create a piece of software or an app or an experience or a product, it's going to have to be sold in multiple markets. We've got to give it the attributes and the process, the configurability to allow for that maximal consistency, but local market pivot. So the second step they then focus on is optimizing their templates, their data schemas, and their architecture so that they can, in fact, do that at speed and scale with the appropriate cost structure, which leads them third into focusing on their infrastructure. We've got a lot of old infrastructures, old content management systems, absent or old translation management systems, but really old ways of producing content that worked in a much slower, much more local universe that simply don't work in today's rapid, globally expanding marketplace that need to be addressed. And you're really trying to do that against a couple of key dimensions. You're trying to maximize your discoverability, right? How do we ensure that we're in a search-dominated universe? In fact, nearly half of the workforce in the Western world is born in an age where search engines, whatever search engine that is the dominant form of information access, the dominant information paradigm. It's a request response. And this is about to be exacerbated even further by voice search and voice activated devices, whether it's your cell phone or an in-home device, the fastest growing consumer application in the history of humankind, and how a person constructs a voice search or a voice inquiry is quite different than how they do it in text or how we do it in the old form factors of digital exploration. And so that is all has a linguistic underpinning that makes this even more important to ensure ensure discoverability, not just in search, but in content ranking relevance inside of the social media universe and as a listener of the consumer discussion. You're trying to maximize that awareness and that discoverability, right? You're going to do that by making sure that you accelerate your global content production with a very adaptive system, right? Reuse when and can it should be. We're focusing the local teams on those critical differentials, and to get there, we've really got we have to harness an adaptive creative process, an adaptive design process, and an adaptive infrastructure, which is really what gets me into the third category. It's time to take a look at your PIM. I presume that's one of the key reasons that you're here at Pinpoint, is really looking at your core product infrastructure, your DAM, your CMS, and the other parts of your global content production and saying, are we optimizing our templates? Do we know that we're going to be able to work with left to right character languages and left to right languages and right to left languages, that we're going to be able to easily adapt the videos and the imagery to make them culturally relevant and addressable by market, that we're operating in a multi-currency environment. And in fact, that the whole way we set up our page templates, our site maps, et cetera, are so that they can be discovered and found and optimized across each of these global markets with all of these new discoverable engines. Let me just illustrate this with a simple use case as we close out here. Let's talk about SkiStar. This is a company that we work with. We work with within River in partnership. And when SkiStar came to us, they had 7 different departments that were ordering translation, none of which were coordinated. So each market was trying to meet the needs of their buyers, skiers, who are looking for passes, reservations, travel and lodging, equipment, and in all of these different markets. And there was no coordination. There was no automation at all. The entire process was manual cut and paste, a lot of email communication, which reduced visibility, which really meant that they didn't have a lot of scalability. They didn't have scalability even in their own community of linguists who could help support some of these activities. But most importantly, they had no overview of their overall process, their overall activities, their overall effort, and their overall spend. And so we pivoted this using Pinpoint as the hub and optimizing a global content production process centered around Pinpoint. Let the teams live inside of the in-river product set, but send content out when it needs to be localized. And then we partnered with SkiStar to optimize that process. We took over all the translation coordination, all the backups. We optimized for scalability, helped them add all the reviews. But the work never had to leave the in-river platform because we've got this nice seamless integration. And this helped them achieve some really, really important results. First is much faster turnaround times. They went from 61 days to about 6 days. So they can now be much more relevant and much more agile as conditions change. Campaigns need to be spun up. You're not waiting in 2 months, not measuring a sprint with a calendar, as they say. They significantly lowered their translation costs, not surprisingly, by working on this. And as importantly, they freed up a lot of time for their teams. They took 50% of the work outside of the process. That's now time that can be put into driving additional revenue, which of course is what all of us are trying to achieve. Okay, hopefully I've made the case for you today that language and local relevance is more important than ever before, and that linguistic excellence is really the key to achieve each of the three key themes that have been the subject of Pinpoint this week. Really ensuring that we have a frictionless path to purchase for our buyers, really raising the bar and meeting the expectations of our customers the way they want to be met in their market, in their language, in whatever medium they choose. And third, of course, really harnessing the power and realizing the potential of the digital transformation efforts, both the financial resource and the human resource and strategic resources that are going into these digital transformations. They can be unlocked with this linguistic excellence. To me, the dream, the fantasy for the the omnilingual universe is really actually to think about it as I think I mentioned in my slides, to really have this multiverse universe. I'm going to steal a term from the Avengers, right? The multiverse, because I think if you look at all across all the different dimensions, it's all about this multiplicity. It's multilingual. It is multi-market. It is multi-channel, it is multimodal, it's using multimedia, and it's that exponential combination of all of those things that makes this so difficult. But if you take a step back, we know that that's how we have to operate, and we rethink. To me, the dream is that every company sees the opportunity to serve 7 billion people, to really explore the expansion of their totally addressable markets, and to remove all of this friction, because it's all right here. It's right in front of us. It's all unrealized opportunity. So that's my dream.